was a time back in 2007-8 when India used to be one of the leaders in solar technology. In fact, when these Chinese companies like Jinko and Trina and many others, in their early days, they came to India to hire engineers. Cell capacity today is 25 gigawatts, expected to cross between 50 and 60 gigawatts in the next 2 years. And again, if you look at all the announcements, close to 100 gigawatts of announcements, the largest Chinese manufacturers are producing something between 60 to 100 gigawatts of modules. The cost of making a cell or module is almost 2 times in the US than it is in India. Same is the case in Europe, same is the case in Japan.
And I think the long-term positive here is that India could become the number 2 country in the world when
Absolutely.
it comes to manufacturing. Welcome to a new episode of Conversations with Solar Energy. Today we have with us someone who we've admired for a very long time, a truly long-term player, observer in the solar sector, Mr. Vinay Rustagi. Welcome, Vinay.
Thank you, Prasanna. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we go on, Vinay, I'm going to introduce you to the people watching. Vinay is an engineer from Delhi University, Delhi College of Engineering, and he completed his MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, post which he was a banker for some time. And in 2010, he actually started his own firm called Bridge to India. Bridge to India was a very important observer of the solar sector in India, helped many people before he sold the company to CRISIL in 2023. And after that, he has kind of from outside in become an inside out player by joining Premier Energies, one of India's leading module and cell manufacturers, as the Chief Business Officer. So Vinay, fantastic to have you here. Let's dive in straight away. Tell us how you got into solar. Let's just start with a soft question first.
Sure. So look, after my MBA, I specialized in finance. I worked in a series of banks. My area of expertise was project finance. So where you typically finance these big ticket projects, be it telecoms, oil and gas, transport, etc. As things would have it, I moved to India back from the UK in 2011, and I was given a responsibility for handling the renewable sector, which was actually pretty growing rapidly at that time. So I financed a few renewable projects, and that got me really excited about the sector because I think in the Indian energy landscape, renewables have a huge role to play. Given the dominance of coal and the imperative for environmental mitigation. So, I learned a lot during those 2-3 years. And that is what ignited the passion for me. And I wanted to make a career in renewable energy.
But still, I think when you say 2010, you're talking about a world when people were talking in kilowatts and today we're talking gigawatts. Isn't that right?
It is right. So you're right. It used to be a very niche sector. There were a lot of skeptics around at that time. Nobody knew how big the sector is going to get. But I think as long as I saw it, the writing was on the wall. It was untenable and is untenable for India or any other country to rely on coal to the extent that we do. We do need to decarbonize. I think climate change is one of the biggest challenges of our times today. And one thing good about renewables is that the pace of technology change is such that the cost is forever coming down, efficiency is improving, etc. So I think I felt it was a conviction and I was ready to kind of act on it, that renewables will occupy the mainstream in the next few years.
So it's 2010, the era of kilowatt level talk still, and you set up Bridge to India. What were you doing at Bridge to India then? What was the plan actually?
So it's very interesting because if you see the name Bridge to India, the premise of the company was to actually help international technology and financing expertise to come to India, to bring them to India, introduce the Indian business, and hopefully help them grow in India, right? That was the founding premise. Having said that, we were actually very, very fast moving and dynamic. We did work with many of the international technology companies like Siemens, Bosch at that time, etc., introducing them to India. But we also tried our hands in project development. We actually developed a few rooftop solar projects on our own. And then one thing led to another. From just pure business and strategy consulting, we moved to transaction advisory. So which means helping people with investment transactions, M&As, JVs, etc. We also slowly, because of our own internal need, we started collecting data about the sector in terms of projects, policies, tenders, etc. And I can't tell you how fast the sector mushroomed from those years, and so much so that research became in its own right an independent vertical in the business, and hence after a period of time that became almost like 50% of our business. So we started monetizing research through, producing a lot of reports. We had a beautiful portal called India RE Navigator, which gave 24/7 data on very comprehensive data across the sector. And we had all the biggest players in the sector, the PSUs, the private players, manufacturers, project developers, etc., subscribers to this portal.
So you actually had a ringside view of the sector in that sense, and you spoke about Siemens, Bosch. Of course we hear about them, but not in
Sure.
the same way.
Correct.
So you've had a ringside view of the Chinese emergence also. Tell us
Correct.
about that. How did you think the Chinese would dominate the way they did, or the way they do today?
No, I mean, I think to be honest, we've all been taken by surprise how the Chinese have completely steamrolled the sector. You would be actually surprised. There was a time back in 2007-8 when India used to be one of the leaders in solar
I know,
technology.
we saw that.
In fact, when these Chinese companies like Jinko and Trina and many others, in their early days, they came to India to hire engineers. So many of the people who worked in Tata Power, Tata BP, or
Right.
Moser Bayer in those days, they actually went to China to help the Chinese set up their plants. So nobody knew how big this is going to get in China. I think, but they did scale up very, very fast. The German and the European industry went almost bankrupt around 2009 and 10. And I think in the early days, everybody was happy because the Chinese were scaling up capacity. They were able to provide equipment which nobody else was. They helped bring down the cost. They helped upgrade the technology. So I think everybody thought, oh, this is a great opportunity, because one of the challenges in those days was the high cost of renewable power. So as long as the cost came down, the consumer was happy, the governments were happy. But then, of course, things took a much bigger turn, and it produced all kinds of other issues on the sides.
Sure. So you're talking about cost being very high. Just give us a sense, because I believe I've seen PPAs being signed at 20 rupees also, 21
Correct.
rupees also.
That's right.
How do those PPAs, will they gradually die out, or something else can be done there?
Well, actually, so we are talking about a period of 2009-10, right? In the early days, the PPAs were actually about 12 to 15 years only. So many of those PPAs, are nearly being phased out. Second, the volume of those PPAs is actually very small. So today,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
there was any discom which was buying, let's say 200
Yeah, yeah.
megawatts at 15 rupees, today they are buying 3,000 or 4,000
Sure.
megawatts, right? So on a per,
So the impact goes down.
so the impact goes down over a period of time. So I think that's manageable.
Great. So let's move on to the Indian manufacturing scene now. We've seen
Sure.
India always talk about manufacturing, but actual action probably nothing like what we saw in the last 4 years, I guess.
Correct. Absolutely.
And why is that? Why were we not able to get in early enough? Like you said, we had all the expertise, but we missed that bus clearly.
Sure.
And now that we're doing it, there are still clearly many, many challenges. How
Yeah.
is that evolving now?
Yeah. So you're right. I think, after the Chinese stepped into the sector in the early part of 2010s, I think India, the government, as well as the IPPs and the consumers, we were just too happy to buy from China. And I remember even in 2014, there was a petition for anti-dumping duty, which the government was initially very keen on. There was a full investigation completed by DG TR in those days. But then at the last minute, the government backed out because there were a lot of concerns that any imposition of duties would mean maybe less supply of modules, higher cost, etc., and higher cost of solar power. The foremost objective of the government in those days was to scale up renewable power in terms of deployment and to bring down the cost of power, because the discoms were very reluctant. Open access and rooftop was pretty much unknown at that time unless the government gave something like 60-70% subsidies. So I think in many ways, we willingly ceded the ground to the Chinese to the extent that they became like a behemoth and started dictating their terms, across the world. I think the true turnaround came after COVID. COVID happened, and then, of course, we had a border dispute with China. And then we saw that overnight, the cost of panels and all the solar equipment went up by 40-50%. Contracts were being cancelled left, right, and center. And I think the government realized that we are setting up a 500 gigawatt target. This is a sector which is of strategic importance to us. The entire fundamentals of decarbonization depend in many ways largely on renewables. So, can you have a situation in which you are deploying hundreds of billions of dollars on the ground, all while you are buying equipment from China? I mean, that was clearly being seen as untenable. And I think that is when the government's resolve really kind of strengthened. They first brought in the basic customs duty. Then, of course, we saw the imposition of ALMM, which has
Right.
kind of progressed from
Mhm.
modules to cells. And then we have seen a whole series of reforms, whether it is PLI incentives or manufacturing zones or lower taxes for manufacturing, etc. And I think it has really been a game changer for the Indian manufacturing sector since that time.
Okay. So, Vinay, I would like you to explain that a little bit because there's a viewpoint which is frequently shared that maybe the government has gone to the other extreme in
Correct.
terms of all these incentives, all this protection, so to say,
Sure.
and the supposedly the higher prices of stuff made in India, modules as well as cells.
Sure.
Just tell us about it. Why is it such a challenge to match Chinese prices today,
Yeah.
and where can we expect to be in some time?
Sure. So I think I can understand from the consumer's point of view, it is very jarring to buy Indian modules at double the cost of Chinese modules. But I think we have to look at the whole issue in long term. We have to look at it in terms of our energy resilience, independence, and overall economic growth. Uh, so what is happening today is that there are some growing pains, but I think we are making fantastic progress. Our module capacity is already close to 80 gigawatts, and the estimations are that it will cross 150 gigawatts in the next 3 years. Cell capacity today is 25 gigawatts, expected to cross between 50 and 60 gigawatts in the next 2 years. And again, if you look at all the announcements, close to 100 gigawatts of announcements, some of them will not come up, but by all accounts, we should become self-sufficient in cells and have some surplus capacity in the next 3 to 4 years. So I think we are making a lot of progress. There are a lot of components and the upstream equipment which goes into making of modules is also now moving to India. So it is a part of the learning phase for the entire industry. The scale is coming up, technology is coming up, skills levels have improved very dramatically in the sector. Now comes the question of why is our cost so high in comparison to the Chinese modules. So I think one, we have to compare apple for apple. If you look at an average Indian, a top 5 module manufacturer today is probably producing between 3 to 4 gigawatts, maybe 5 gigawatts of modules. The largest Chinese manufacturers are producing something between 60 to 100 gigawatts of modules, right? So their scale is more than 10 times our scale, and that scale has a huge effect in terms of cost of production, economies of scale, etc. In terms of technology, they have homegrown technology. Their suppliers, they operate in a cluster, so their logistical cost, operations cost is much lower. And then they get massive subsidies and state support, a lot of which is actually undocumented. So if you take all these things into account, plus the fact that for China, it is not really a market. They're not operating with the normal, well accepted market based principles of commerce. For them, it is a strategic move to make sure they dominate the international solar manufacturing landscape and pretty much basically make everybody else unviable across the world. So, what they're doing is they're tactically managing the prices, in many cases, bringing them and keeping them below cost. Whereas, of course, we can't afford to do that in India. So I think when you are comparing my price with their price, you are comparing my cost plus with their cost minus, right? So that is, these are, if you add all these things up, suddenly it starts becoming clearer why the Indian module price is higher than the Chinese module price. But I think it is a very important part of the bargain that we have to accept, because we are creating jobs in India. We are creating supply side resilience and self sufficiency for the Indian economy. And I think over the next 2 to 3 years, let there be no doubt that as we all scale up our capacities, as the supply chain moves to India, the cost delta between India and China is going to come down very dramatically. Uh, the other thing which I forgot to mention is that currently, in order to promote domestic manufacturing, the government is imposing duties on everything, right? So there's a duty on glass, there's a duty on EVA, there's a duty on aluminum frame, all of which adds up to my cost. Chinese are not bearing any of this cost, right? So my procurement cost is higher because of a lower scale, higher logistics, higher taxes and duties. So with all of this, it is not surprise that a cost ultimately is much higher. But the common man, I think we need to do a much better job of explaining what is the reason for that and how the landscape is going to play out in future, which is in the next 2 to 3 years. The other very important thing to bear in mind is that don't just compare us with China, compare us with the rest of the world. India is the most competitive producer of solar modules today in comparison to any other country bar China. We ourselves have examined a manufacturing foray in the US, like some of the other Indian companies, and we find that the cost of making a cell or module is almost 2 times in the US than it is in India. Same is the case in Europe, same is the case in Japan or some of the other developed countries, right? So I think we don't just have to look at China and compare ourselves with China all the time. You look at the global situation. India is actually one of the most preferred suppliers of solar equipment in many other countries when they are trying to diversify away from China.
Fantastic. So you were basically saying that when it comes to costs, don't benchmark with China
Correct.
because that's unfair.
Correct.
Benchmark with other markets
Correct.
where we are much more competitive.
Correct.
And I think the long-term positive here is that India could become the number 2 country in the world when it comes
Absolutely.
to manufacturing. I
Absolutely.
hope that's a fair assumption.
Correct. Sorry, just to bring one more thing into the play. I mean, India can also be a much more reliable partner in international trade, which follows the best practices as far as the law and order are concerned, traceability, human rights, market-based principles. We are not managing prices. There's nobody at the top dictating prices to us to, for example, just to make sure that domestic manufacturing doesn't come up in other countries. And that is why we find that there are many other countries who are willing to buy modules from India today, as against China, which is of course supplying them at a much lower.
Great. So when you spoke about the cost, I get that. There's a lot of noise right now about shortages in India, despite the high module capacity, the 25 gigawatt cells. Apparently, there's been a shortages of module, especially DCR modules, because that's been mandated by the government. What's happening? What do you think will happen there, and would we see a resolution soon enough?
Oh, absolutely, we will. See, I think what is happening is that if you look at the DCR market, there are only 2 or 3 components of demand today. One is the Surya Ghar Yojana, the residential rooftop solar scheme. Second is Kusum. Third is the CPSU scheme. And if you, there are obviously huge targets behind all these schemes, but if you look at the historic targets, or rather the implementation, the progress on the ground has been much, much smaller. Now, what has happened over the last 12 months is that the government has suddenly given a huge impetus to execution in the Surya Ghar Yojana and the Kusum scheme, because of which the demand has skyrocketed. Now, in response to all the measures to support manufacturing, supply is coming up. But we have to understand that as we move further upstream from module assembly into cells and further upstream, manufacturing becomes a completely different ball game in terms of capital intensity, complexity of operations, technology scale, etc. And I think that is taking a little bit of time in coming up. Having said that, we are nearly there already. Because today our cell manufacturing capacity is 25 gigawatt. I think by the end of this year, we expect that to be about 35 gigawatt. Now, any new plant also takes about 6 to 12 months in stabilization and completely ramping up to, say, 70 to 80% of capacity utilization. So I think we are talking at best a scenario of another 3 to 6 months where there may be a little bit of supply crunches. But I think after that, I think we should see enough and more capacity, because even though ALMM less 2, that is the cell part, is expected to be implemented from June 2026 onwards, a lot of the demand from the utility scale market is not expected to come at least until end of 2027 or 28, simply because of the timelines based on these projects, right? So I think in the 6 months or so, we will have a scenario where the supply of DCR modules and the domestic cells is actually much greater than demand. So I think it is very much a short-term phenomenon.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that bit about we almost being there, but there's still clearly complications. Is that also linked to the fact that between module assembly, let's call it, and cell manufacturing, it's a completely different ball game?
Oh, it absolutely is. See, what are we doing in a module assembly? You are actually buying all the components. whether it is the cell, the EVA sheets, the glass panel, etc., etc., and you are laminating it all together to make one single module, right? Cell. So that is not manufacturing; it is more like an assembly operation. You can set up a module assembly line in 6 months, much lower capital cost, and you can make the same different kinds of modules on the same assembly line. In a cell manufacturing, or if you go further upstream into ingot and wafer, that is when the real dynamics and the complexities of manufacturing start coming up. You're certainly dealing with very complex chemical and material led processes. And it's a game of very, very fine, perfect, margins in terms of getting the quality and the efficiency absolutely right. So I think, and you are dealing with many, I would say, difficult chemicals and gases as part of that process. So I think it takes much longer to set up a cell line. It is much more costly, of course. But then even once you've set up the line, it takes 6 to 12 months to stabilize that line and start producing the right product at the right scale. So it's a different ballgame altogether. But I think as an industry, we are getting there. And like I said, in another 3 to 6 months, we should have enough supply to meet our demand.
We saw in modules how people said anything below a gigawatt would not be sustainable in the long term. Today, I think we're already hearing that even a gigawatt is not enough. Is that going to apply to cell also? Because we are again seeing a host of announcements from people who are saying we will set up a 500 megawatt cell line or a 1 gigawatt cell line. Is that going to be sustainable?
I think increasingly the way the sector is evolving, given the capital complexity and technology and operations related issues, I think the minimum scale in this sector is going to be 5 gigawatts plus. And that is why we as a company, our aspiration is to grow to 10 gigawatts from ingots to wafers, cells, and modules by the end of 2028. Because more scale brings the ability to have more efficiencies in procurement. You have the financial capacity to upgrade your technology and to be able to offer large scale products to your clients within a short period of time. So today, any large IPP, for example, if they're implementing a 300 megawatt project for which they need 450 megawatts of modules, they want 450 megawatts of supply in a period of about 2 to 3 months. Now, somebody who has a capacity of 1,000 megawatts, he's producing maybe 700 megawatts of modules in a year. They can't supply even a small portion of the IPP's requirement. So I think from a market perspective, as well as the fundamentals of the business perspective, the minimum scale is going to be 5 gigawatts plus.
Okay. So it's interesting you mentioned that because I've always wondered, we've been looking at numbers recently, and when I talk about actual output from companies
Right.
versus their nameplate capacities or
Right.
the capacities that they've been claiming, it seems much lower. I mean,
Correct.
if I was to put a benchmark, 60 to 70% even, maybe
Sure.
around that.
Sure.
Is that the general rule, or do you actually have companies who say 12 gigawatt and they produce 12 gigawatts?
No, so one is the theoretical nameplate capacity. Then there is something called what we say as the effective capacity, because effective capacity takes into account how many days in a year can you actually operate, what is the maintenance period shutdown, what is the number of shifts you're operating, and then very often you have to make changes you have to shut down the plant, because let's say you have to switch from one module configuration to the second module configuration, then you have to shut down the plant, retool it, and then you have to start production again. So if you take these things into account, I would say both modules as well as cells, the best efficiency that you can achieve or utilization you can achieve is somewhere between 80 to 85%. You can go higher selectively, particularly if you have a very good team on the ground. So for example, in the last quarter, our cell and module utilization was definitely more than 85% in both the cases. But by and large, I would say, so effective capacity is about 85%. And then it depends. It becomes a case of how much orders do you have, how prepared is your technical and operational team to be able to utilize it fully. So very often you will find that not just in China, but all over the world, these lines are operating at anything between 50 to 70% capacity utilization rates.
So when somebody told me once as a rough thumb rule, he said, look, you need to run a solar line at 80% capacity for at least 3 years for us to break even or make money on it.
Correct.
You would agree with that broadly?
Yes, I would. Only for the simple reason that the technology life cycle is getting very, very short. What is happening is that we are there's a huge amount of R&D going on, particularly in China, and every 3 to 4 years there's a step change in technology. To keep up, we have to keep investing and upgrading in our plants. So if you're doing that, how do you recoup your investment, right? It's a highly capital intensive sector, and in 3 to 4 years, technology becomes outdated.
So you spoke about the China factor as a massive influencer, despite whatever we might want. Uh, from a country which, like you said, literally learned from the others and then scaled up at an unimaginable scale, probably, and in some ways supported the growth of solar, I guess, thanks to Chinese lower prices. Today, how does a country like India manage that? Because as I understand it, when we talk about further backward integration into ingots and wafers, we are still going to go back to China for machines. They lead on innovation also today, which is huge for them. Is there a way out? Are there options? Where are we placed right now?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question, Prasanna. I think we have no option but to look for other options and to develop our own capabilities, right? So I think, but it is going to take a long time, and it is going to take a very concerted, well thought out plan to do so. One, we have to invest in domestic technology development. There is no two ways about this. We have to develop our R&D capabilities. We have to invest in centers of excellence, whether it is in IITs or other specialist centers like NICE or others. We have to enter into strategic tie-ups with international bodies which do excellent R&D work, particularly in places like Germany, Italy, Australia, US, etc. And we have to slowly look at starting to manufacture the upstream or the manufacturing equipment ourselves. We have started entering into discussions with the government how to instigate and propagate the manufacturing capability in India. As a company, we are very very conscious of the heavy dependence on China, and we are taking steps to reduce our dependence on them, because there's all kinds of risk in terms of you don't know when the flow of technology might be stopped, or the skills or relevant people might there might be some kind of disruption. So we are trying to diversify our supply chains. We are buying equipment from other countries even when it is 20 to 30% or 40% more expensive at times. And we are investing a huge amount in building our own skill sets. Whether it is keeping spare parts, training our engineers, etc., etc. So I think it is something that as a country we ought to do, particularly if we want to become a genuine China alternative for supplying to other countries.
Tell me, I've always seen solar as three parts, which is developers, there are the EPCs, and of course, manufacturing. From your perspective, if you had to tell somebody which is the most exciting bit of solar, which would it be? And where could Indian companies actually go global in these three areas?
Well, I think the clear cut answer, Prasanna, is it is manufacturing. Manufacturing is where there is the biggest value add. If you look at EPC is obviously doing all the engineering procurement. But all said and done, building and construction of solar and even wind projects is a relatively simple commoditized process. It will probably become a little bit more complex after storage comes in and we are looking at all kinds of RTC and FDRE projects. But still, it is a relatively a much simple project. And then the project development is actually more of a financing led business where you are looking for ideally lump sum solutions, both in terms of EPC as well as O&M, and you're finding the best, most efficient capital for deployment in the business. I think it is manufacturing which is the most dynamic part of the business. We talked about technology life cycles, the complexity, the uncertainty produced by trade treaties, and so many other things, right? So that is where the highest value addition is in the business, the biggest amount of job creation, and overall wealth creation in the economy. And if you look at, our EPC companies have tried and gone to other countries, in many cases burnt hands and come back. Project development business, by and large, is a very, very localized business, because you need to understand the whole procurement regime, land acquisition, transmission, etc. And we find that most developers tend to stick to their home countries, or they're very, very choosy and selective when they go to other countries. In India, there are many international developers, but if you look at the scale, in total, the international utilities probably don't have a scale of more than 10% of the total market. It is the local developers and the private equity backed platforms which dominate the market. And I think it is very difficult for them to go to other countries and to grow the business for various reasons, right? So, whereas if you see the manufacturing, many of the Indian companies are trying to basically go abroad. They are looking for opportunities, including Premier ourselves. We see a very genuine opportunity which will open up, hopefully, much more in future of exporting India-made modules to US, Europe, and many other countries around the world. So, I think that is where the biggest opportunity lies.
So you spoke about RTC and FDRE. Of course, we noticed that the share of these in the tenders is going up a lot. We've also seen, by the way, Chinese firms who seem to have storage arms as well, Trina or Jinko for that matter. Is that a trend we should expect in India? Is that pressure already there on you to start some sort of a storage exploratory manufacturing also?
Well, I won't put it like a pressure. I think it is a huge opportunity. The market clearly needs more firm and hybrid power solutions. So I think not just storage, but there are many other technologies which come into picture. Customer need is moving along that direction. There's a willingness to pay higher prices because just plain vanilla solar and wind is not going to meet the need of the customer anymore. So I think we ourselves are looking at a few more related opportunities in that area, and hopefully we should be in a position to announce them soon.
But in many ways, storage, we are exactly where solar was a few years back, right? In terms of
Yes.
dependency on
So you're
China.
right. I think in many ways, if you see, it is playing out in the story is playing out in a similar respect as it is in solar. The difference I see here is that having learned the lessons of solar, I think the Indian government is attuned, is alive to making sure that we don't go the same way in storage. So, for example, there's already a PLI scheme out for storage. There's a manufacturing initiative out in storage. And I think we will see more of that. Particularly, the costs of storage have come down very, very drastically. There are many Indian companies from Reliance onwards who have announced big forays into storage. And we ourselves are also looking at something along similar lines.
So, Vineet, one last question. Now that you've come back to corporate life, you're the business officer at Premier Energies. What's the thing keeping you awake at night? Is it some big target? What's the next big milestone to expect?
See, I think it is a very exciting time to be a solar manufacturer in India today. Just to give you an idea, our business is going to almost treble in size over the next 1 year. We have various expansion projects under implementation. So the first priority for us is to make sure that these expansion projects are implemented on time and on cost. And then we have various strategic forays, be it in storage or other related areas that we're examining right now. So evaluating them, making sure we get the business model right, we choose the right partners, etc., is something which is a one big opportunity. The next one big opportunity is backward integration. So today we are in cells and modules. We have already announced an entry into wafers, and over a period of time, we want to scale our ingot and wafer capacity to bring it at par with cells and modules. So we see a lot of opportunities for expansion, horizontally, vertically, sideways, etc. And I think it's a great time to be a manufacturer in the space as we speak.
Super. With that, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Prasanna. Thanks for having me.